Okay, all set.
Okay, good evening and welcome to the Skills Economy and Growth Scrutiny Commission. We are welcoming a number of our guests, not only in the chamber here at Hackney Town Hall, but also virtually, and to everybody who is watching online. Just a reminding that this meeting is recorded and live streamed. The press may be in attendance, so you have to remember that this is a meeting, a public meeting, but not a meeting of the public. The rights of the press and public to record the film meeting will apply. Just a reminder to everybody to keep your microphones on mute throughout, so that we don't have the awful howl round that we had when we were practicing. And if you are still getting feedback, please turn off any nearby devices. If someone forgets to switch them off, I'm not being rude, but I will mute you. So just a warning. And all members and meeting participants should keep your cameras on. This is simply a courtesy so that everybody can maintain the transparency of democracy and know who is taking part in the meeting. Only unmute your microphones when you're required to make a presentation and or to ask or answer a question. And if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. If you're doing that virtually, you have a hand raising function. If you're in the room, you can use the old-fashioned analog way of lifting your arm. You will notice there's a chat function. This is only to be used to alert me if you wish to speak. And if you, a small number of people may indeed have been joining by telephone. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoy the conversation this evening. Now, I'm just going to run through briefly what we have to get through this evening: introductions and apologies, urgent items, orders of business, declarations of interest. The meat of our meeting is on decarbonising Hackney's economy, specifically supporting the small and medium-sized enterprises to decarbonise. We are taking evidence from both the GLA and from our own officers. We'll have a quick squiz through the work programme, look at the minutes of the previous meeting, any other business, and I'm planning to finish, as always, on time at 9 o'clock. So, introductions and apologies. Anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Polly Billington, the Councillor for de Beauvoir and Chair of the Skills Economy and Growth Commission. We have in attendance this evening most of the Commission, and we have formal apologies from Councillor Richard Lufkin. Do we have any other apologies that have been sent? Does anybody like to alert me to any? Great, fine, thank you. Any urgent items or order of business anybody would like to flag with me? Even better. Any declarations of interest that anybody needs to alert us to when discussing this item and this matter? Wonderful. So we can go to the meat of the meeting, which is most excellent. This evening we are looking at decarbonising Hackney's economy. This has been a theme of the work of the Skills Economy and Growth Commission throughout this year, and particularly this evening we're exploring the issues to do with supporting small and medium-sized enterprises to decarbonise. We're particularly keen to explore this because of the nature of our economy here in Hackney, and knowing that we have made extremely ambitious targets, not only for ourselves as a local authority, but also for the wider community to be able to decarbonise well ahead of the legal targets of 2050. How do we do that and support the people who make our community thrive and survive? We would like to take some evidence from a range of people, and particularly I'm pleased that we're able to welcome a couple of presenting officers. One is Philip Graham, the Executive Director of Good Growth at the Greater London Authority, and then we also have Suzanne Johnson, Head of Area Regeneration, and Jasmine, I'm not going to be able to pronounce your surname properly, and I do apologise because I normally like to check beforehand. Would you just tell me out loud to everybody so that I make sure that I get it right from now on?
That's no problem. It's Jasmine Ceccarelli-Drury.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jasmine Ceccarelli-Drury. Now I'll try to keep that correct. So first of all, I'd just like to say that in the interest of making sure that we get a rich and deep discussion, we'd like to keep the presentations to 10 minutes each. So first of all, I'd like to invite Philip Graham from the Greater London Authority to give you a presentation, a little bit about what the Greater London Authority is doing in this area, what you know, what's possible, what London boroughs like ours should be doing. Thanks, Phil. Can I just remind you to put your microphone on?
You can indeed, and I've just done it. Thank you for having me here.
I hope I haven't confused matters too much by turning up in person, but it was only around the corner, so I thought I ought to come along. This is my first time using our new slide pack with our new City Hall on the front page, which is very exciting for me. But if we can go on to the first slide, I'll try very best to get through this in 10 minutes. So just as a bit of introduction, and Hackney has obviously itself declared a climate emergency, an ambitious target for getting to net zero. Similarly, London as a city has always been a leader in this. In 2018, we were the first megacity to declare a climate emergency, and in 2020, the Mayor declared his ambition for London to be net zero by 2030. In 2021, he was re-elected with this as a key manifesto promise. The main thing that we have done since then is the key thing we've done since then is with regard to the overall strategy is publish the analysis that we've carried out on the pathways to get London to net zero by 2030 last month. And indicated within that what we think is the most appropriate route for London to aim for, which is what was called, in slightly jargonistic terms, the accelerated green pathway. And this is essentially the middle ground between something that literally pushes every possible button, but that we think actually would not be practical in terms of either the powers that we might get, or in some cases the impact on communities, and something which moves too slowly. So this is essentially the middle ground. But the analysis did show that in taking forward a pathway of this kind to avoid catastrophic climate change, as well as reducing emissions, you can support tens of thousands of jobs, you can improve health, you can reduce inequalities, and improve quality of life. And I think one of the key things from the Mayor's point of view is this is an environmental issue, but also a social justice issue. The people who will be most affected by failure to take action will be those who are least able to deal with it, the most disadvantaged in our city. So we have to look at it through that lens as well as the environmental lens. If you could flick to the next slide. The overarching policy framework that we've got in place to try and move in that direction is the Green New Deal mission. This is part of London's recovery programme from the pandemic, and it aims to both tackle the climate and ecological emergencies and to improve air quality, but critically also to double the size of the green economy and to take advantage and drive the economic opportunities that come from a well-managed, socially just, fair transition. Supporting London's SMEs to manage the transition is going to be a critical part of that, and critical to London's economic resilience, because inaction is going to leave London's SMEs unable to thrive, just as it's going to leave the city unable to thrive. Can we move on to the next slide? I'm trying to get through. This is just a quick one, but it's an indication of the scale of the challenge. The graph on the left shows the breakdown of businesses by size across London's boroughs. Shows Hackney as one of the boroughs that has the largest number of businesses, but it also shows just what a huge proportion of London's business base is micro businesses, so fewer than 10 people, and that's the long red line on the left of every borough's line, and the blue to the side of that. The graph on the right-hand side shows that 99% of businesses are small and medium enterprises. But on the other hand, those businesses represent 48% of employment and 36% of turnover. So they're a critical part of the problem, but they're not the totality of it. But it does highlight the importance of supporting these businesses to shift to net zero if we're going to achieve our environmental objectives and support business through that. So next slide. Crikey. Okay. So scale of the challenge is enormous. We've seen how many businesses are SMEs. It's hugely diverse. Businesses in it have different needs, different priorities, going to need to take actions. The Science-Based Target Initiative, which is an international initiative, not a GLA one, has introduced a specific SME tool to help SMEs understand their emissions and monitor programs against them, because that's one of the critical issues they face. Next slide. Through. But the big challenge in many cases that SMEs face is actual understanding of what their emissions are and what they must do to reduce them. We've seen that there's no lack of desire, no lack of sentiment to act. They understand the need, but the challenge is understanding how they can take action and how they can get there. The Mayor of London has a set of programmes to address that. There are a wide range of other programmes in place run by the UN, run by the UK government, run by NGOs to support that as well. If we go to the next slide. So how have we been assessing this? There have been a whole set of programmes. Probably the key one recently has been London Council's 2021 survey. It shows again increasing awareness amongst businesses. It shows that what they really need is advice and support from boroughs, from the GLA and from others about how to be more sustainable, about how to retrofit, reduce energy usage and improve efficiency, and support just to meet other businesses who are facing the same challenges and learn from them. But what we do see is over 2/3 of businesses taking action to actually drive this forward. So there is we're working on a base of willingness to move. Next one. But what this suggests is the areas that should be prioritised, whoever is providing support here, is supporting businesses in understanding their carbon baseline and understanding what strategies they can use to help get to net zero, and then reducing their business and workplace emissions. There's issues around owner-occupier splits. The incentives are in the wrong place in many cases. There's issues about understanding energy usage and where you can cut it. Understanding payback periods and finding ways to provide investment to support that. And then the simple question of finance for retrofit, which is a simple question but a very difficult answer. If we move on to the next slide, there's a big role for local authorities here, which was one of the questions you asked. Setting clear targets is important, but they must be paired with support to meet them. Housing, planning, transport, procurement, and the convening role of local authorities can all play a role in this. And it is those local net zero targets that drive that action and that drive the piece. The SME groups and the SMEs themselves have identified the importance of information, importance of finance and funding, including grants, importance of standards and regulation, and clearly tax incentives are an issue as well, though that's more about trying to move national government to the right place than necessarily what you can do at local level. So what do we see as the role for local authorities? Providing information and support, if you move to the next slide. Working with Londonwide partners to map what support is out there and create clear pathways across a number of areas. We're trying to work with London councils and with boroughs. And this is one to try and create what we're calling a no wrong door approach. So wherever you go into the system, an SME can be pointed to the advice and support that it needs, wherever that comes through. Support for retrofit. Support for innovation and working with regional partners, so working with local London or London councils to try and roll those out. And thinking about what funding is available. Offset funds are a particular opportunity in many cases to support businesses to do all those things we've talked about, set a carbon baseline, put in place net zero plans, address energy efficiency. And then I've got one last slide. So just because I've done a lot of what you might do, I did want to just run through what we are doing as well. We've got three programs that directly target this issue. The Mayor's Business Climate Challenge ran as a pilot over the last couple of years. We're now trying to scale it up, and the scaled up version will directly support 250 small businesses across London to do all those things I've been talking about. So to set a carbon baseline, develop a strategy. There'll be grant funding for some of the actions they might take to address that. But critically, it will also develop an evidence base and learning networks that we can use through our wider business support mechanisms to actually get the message out and provide support more broadly, even if we don't have that, even if the number of businesses we can directly support is relatively small. The Better Futures and Better Futures Plus are essentially accelerator programs for small businesses working in the low carbon sector. But again, one of the things that we do with those businesses that we're trying to help to grow is try and help them reach to develop tools that other businesses can use and products that they can sell to them they can market to deal with this. And then the London Business Hub, which is our overall online business support programme supported by the LEAP, which is London's Local Economic Partnership, has a range of resources as part of its online offer in what's called the London Climate Hub to support businesses with information and tools to act on climate change. There is, we know, a lot of other support across London. Part of the challenge here, which comes back to that no wrong door, is that it's quite fragmented. It's quite difficult to know where it is. It's split up in all kinds of different places. And something that we want to do as we go forward, working with the boroughs, is to try and find ways to make it easier for small businesses to navigate that and to find the best support and the right support that they need. And there you go.
Thank you very much, Phil. I really appreciate it. Are there any questions or clarifications at this stage? We'll go straight. Thank you very much, Phil. Can we go for questions and clarifications before we go on to the next presentations? Because I think it's useful for us to have the presentations all in one go and then we can dig deep. Any questions for Phil now? Sam?
Yes, thank you very much, Phil, for that presentation. I was just wondering if you could take us through exactly what grant is available to SMEs from the GLA at the moment. Would you be able to, quantify what the sum is? Because you've mentioned something like the Business Climate Challenge. You're saying 250 small businesses. Is there support beyond that, and what does that kind of look like? And is there any chance you would be able to give us an indication of uptake?
The Business Climate Challenge is we're scaling that up at the moment, so it will be a £1 million programme. We think through that £1 million programme we can support 250 businesses. It's not absolute. The totality of that £1 million isn't going out in grants because there are other elements of the programme, but that gives you a rough idea of the scale that we're looking at there. And the pilot that we ran was very oversubscribed, as you would expect. I would imagine we haven't launched the scaled up version yet, but I would imagine that will be oversubscribed as well, if I'm honest, because 250 businesses isn't very many for a city the size of London. And as you saw from some of the early slides in the presentation, we know that there's a huge amount of appetite amongst London small businesses to take advantage of this. In terms of wider grant support for small businesses, and directly in terms of climate adaptation, and the honest answer from the GLA's point of view is the Business Climate Challenge is the programme that we've been able to afford and are able to run. There are a wide range there are other business support programmes that we run that may well be ways in which businesses can look into some of these challenges. But as you're probably aware, the GLA is a reasonably thinly financed organisation in some ways. We're a relatively thin layer within London's government between the boroughs and central government. So in a time where we're having to look at how we deploy our resources more generally, we don't have a wider range of programmes that are aimed very specifically at this issue.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now move on to Suzanne. Suzanne and Jasmine, are you presenting together or are you presenting separately?
We're presenting together, Councillor Billington, so Jasmine will share the presentation and I'll begin and then hand over to Jasmine and then I'll do a bit at the end.
Lovely, thank you so much. Again, I'd just like to remind you, you have 10 minutes just so that we can dig deeper after you've presented. Thanks very much. I'll hand over to Jasmine.
Thank you. If I could just have the next slide, please, Jasmine. Thank you, everyone. For those who...
Sorry, I've just noticed it's not presenting correctly. Let me just try and...
Looks good to me.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. So yes, myself and Jasmine are from the area region team, so thank you very much for having us along. So we're just going to talk about kind of decarbonising Hackney's economy, how we're supporting SMEs to decarbonise from the kind of council and area region and economic development perspective. Next slide, please, Jasmine. Great. So as I'm sure many people are aware, the council is committed to responding to climate emergency and reaching net zero by 2040, and indeed we've got more targets built in advance of that. And in response to that target and meeting that, we're currently working on developing a climate action plan, and within that we're looking at kind of 7 thematic areas, and those are listed on the right hand side of the slide. I won't read them all out. The ones that we're going to focus on tonight are highlighted in darker green, and these are relating to specifically how we work with businesses, albeit it's all relevant to businesses and how we work with them, but we'll focus on consumption emissions and the green economy and just transition. And the reason being is that that's the areas that indeed my service and Jasmine are very involved in. Next slide, please, Jasmine. And before I hand over to Jasmine, I just wanted to kind of, I guess, share the kind of three key areas that we've been thinking about in relation to how we can work with businesses and SMEs on this agenda. The first one is thinking about businesses in Hackney and how they can transition to the green economy, or how businesses are kind of effectively green in terms of businesses being in green industries and the associated kind of green jobs associated with those particular businesses. So that's one area of focus. And the next area is a bit more general, and that's looking at kind of any business in Hackney, whether we classify them as a kind of green industry or a green business or not. And this is looking at kind of green consumption, so how we can work with our residents to encourage kind of greener consumer choices in the borough and kind of effectively greener spending in businesses and existing businesses in the borough, and indeed new businesses. And the third area that we've been looking at are kind of how our businesses in Hackney contribute to net zero. So this is around kind of, again, any business, not just a green business specifically, but looking at kind of greener business practices and operations. So that, I thought that may be a helpful way to kind of set out how we are kind of thinking about this. And I'm sure there will be other ways actually, but just to kind of share our kind of 3 key pillars that we're considering at the moment. And I'll hand over to Jasmine for the rest of the slides before I come at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. I'll just spend a bit of time unpacking some of those definitions. And on my slide, part of the screen is cut off, so I hope that doesn't impact your visual of the screen. But just to start with the green economy, so as Suzanne said, we're using the operational definition of green jobs as adopted by WPI Economics. So we're looking at those businesses formally identified in the green economy, including in those sectors in bold below. And the reason why we're interested in this in Hackney is really because of the scale of opportunity. So over the next 30 years, London is expecting a near 5-fold increase of green jobs. So obviously a significant increase in the number of economic opportunities available for residents. But we also recognise that some of those emerging jobs will displace existing jobs, including those in carbon intensive industries. And as Phil mentioned, it's really important that we address this transition in a just way. So this means not exacerbating any existing inequalities in the green economy, but also recognising that some businesses will need support to transition out of the green intensive industries. When we're thinking about green consumption, as Suzanne said, this is a climate action plan in its own right, but we're particularly interested in this conversation around the role that businesses can play to support our residents to be more empowered to make green decisions in their consumption. So thinking particularly here about, for example, the role of town centres as retail hubs and how that can lead to, for example, reduced food waste or our residents enabled to make decisions around less plastic or reuse and more sustainable clothing items. And then in that wider contribution to net zero, we're really recognising that businesses are stakeholders in Hackney and all businesses will have a role to play in supporting us on that journey to net zero by 2040. And so in terms of how we understand small businesses to both understand this for themselves, this shift to net zero, and also to take action, it's worth recognizing that there's a whole spectrum of actions that can be taken. So on the left hand, we're seeing those sort of larger, potentially more difficult decisions that a business might need to make, for example, to transition to the green economy more formally, if they, for example, are required to retrain or to invest in green entrepreneurship. But then we also have those more tangible actions, for example, around recycling more or investing in an electrified fleet or sustainability training. And those businesses in the middle around supporting green consumption, this is a bit of a combination of the two, but interesting to consider in their own right. And I think some of these statistics were already referenced by Phil, but we are leaning to London data at present. So for example, recognising that 9 in 10 businesses recognise the UK government's targets to bring net zero to 2050. That doesn't always lead to businesses taking action. So currently 1/5 of businesses across London are not taking action. But then in terms of understanding how businesses are addressing the opportunities more broadly, for example, in the green economy or to support consumption emissions, this is less reported on at a London level, also at a national level. And we think that a local Hackney-based business survey would be needed to understand the specifics of understanding at a Hackney level. To understand what's in the control of businesses and what they need support with is obviously inherently linked with how challenging some of those actions are for small businesses to take. The Zero Carbon Business Network has really usefully set out some of those quick to longer term actions that businesses can take, and that information is very ready for businesses to find. And I think, as Phil said, it's probably a matter of us supporting with coordinating some of that information. Then there are a set of actions, especially around that transition to the green economy, which are less reported on and are going to be more time consuming and costly for businesses to take, for example, around retraining, rebranding, or developing stronger ESG, environmental sustainability and governance business approaches. And this is reported nationally, so businesses are citing costs, feasibility, and a lack of information at a national level as being the key barriers to these changes. And at a London level, this is also recorded in the London 1000 Business Survey. So, for example, referencing understanding of appropriateness for the business, the initial costs of investing in lower carbon initiatives, and also the time it takes for a business to employ those. But again, as Phil mentioned, there is incredible appetite from local businesses, which is very positive, and businesses are suggesting that the support they need is largely around financial incentives, but also coordinating that advice and support. And then just to reiterate, Councillor Billington, that point you made at the beginning, the fact that Hackney is constituted of so many micro and small businesses means that this challenge really is real for us, and we're aware of that, and the scale is particular due to this concentration of micro and small businesses. I'm just going to flick through this slide as I'm conscious of time, but I want to spend a bit of time thinking about what's already been done by small businesses in Hackney to approach this challenge, and I'm going to lean on a few case studies to evidence this. So the Zero Emissions Network, for example, which was founded in 2012 as a partnership between Tower Hamlets, Islington and Hackney, creates financial opportunities for businesses to employ new pilot opportunities, for example, investing in electric vans, e-bikes, but also other initiatives. And you can see here 2 examples of Hackney businesses that are taking up this offer. Through our area-based approach to regeneration, we're very familiar with many of our businesses across our town centres, and we're starting to see how businesses are employing communication campaigns or a change of branding to support green consumerism. So I've selected 2 case studies here to bring that to light: Marks and Spencer's in Hackney Central and a local coffee shop which has eliminated plastic takeaway cups. And then we're also seeing at that larger scale the innovation around the green economy and clustering of businesses, for example, around Hackney Wick and the Olympic Park, which are creating these innovation districts which are supporting green entrepreneurship. So you can see here a range of different ways that small and medium businesses across Hackney are already responding to the opportunities. And it is an opportunity. I think we're recognising that consumers are voting with their feet. The green economy itself is expanding, and there is economic opportunity, and businesses are recognising this. So to talk about that idea of support and who's that come from.
Jasmine, I'm just going to warn you, you've got 1 more minute. Thank you.
That's no problem. Thank you. I just list here that there are many external bodies that the council will look to work with and support and consolidate information of the existing advice on net zero. And there's also, as Phil mentioned, the GLA funding for net zero available. I'm going to hand over to Suzanne to talk a little bit about the role of the council going forward and 1 or 2 other case studies.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm conscious of time, so I won't read out everything on this slide, but you can obviously look at that at your leisure. And this just lists some of the kind of, the role of the council really in terms of what we can do to work with, support businesses and move this agenda on. And as Jasmine said, it is a huge opportunity and the interest is there. I think we need to take into account everything that Phil said, Jasmine's covered, and kind of continue to work on this really. But I will leave you with that slide there, and then next slide please, Jasmine. And in terms of what we're already doing, Jasmine's mentioned zero emissions network, low traffic neighbourhoods, electrical vehicle charging points. In terms of Hackney Central, which is the image in the middle of the slide, this is a new station entrance that we're currently working with TfL to construct, with a lot of planting, green roofs, sustainable architecture and design. So through our planning process, we can achieve a great deal with new developments. Next one, Jasmine, please. And this is just some information about council grant funding that we've given out recently, or that we're in the process of giving out. Again, I won't read all these in great detail, but we've used some government funding, emergency funding from the COVID-19 pandemic to develop some business support programmes, particularly around kind of business adaptations, including making businesses greener and more sustainable. And we're in the process of kind of, I guess, awarding that funding at the moment. So there will be more news on the successful kind of businesses and projects that have bid into those various funding streams over the next few months as we get into contract with those businesses and the projects begin to roll out. So we'll publish that at a later date. Next, please, Jasmine. And just some next steps there. So continued development of the action plan, further research, as Jasmine mentioned, into the green economy in Hackney, opportunities for the future, a survey with our Hackney businesses, because we know quite a lot at the London level, or a decent amount, but we want to know more at the Hackney level. Preparation of an economic development strategy in the next year, which really will focus on this agenda a great deal. And just continued engagement, support and communication with businesses and delivery of that grant funding that I just mentioned. And I think that's the last slide.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much both, and really appreciate you managing to keep almost to time. I'd like to open up to questions. Would it be possible, Jasmine, for you to go back to that slide, that really helpful one with the 3 circles, with the green economy and the green consumption and the contributing to net zero? Because that's, I think, would be a very good guide for our questioning as we've been considering what the roles are of the council to tackle those 3 areas. If we just have those up, I think that might just help with focusing the Commission's questions. I suppose the Commission will ask any questions they want, but I suppose it will just enable them to kind of go, well, I'm actually talking about the green economy, or I'm talking about green consumption, or whatever. Can I take questions from the Commission for any of our presenters? Councillor Sharman and then Councillor Smith.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks to the presenters for a great canter through, actually, some of the real challenges. What is missing to me at the moment, and it's not a criticism of you, but more a scale of the tasks that we have, are 2 things. One is an analysis, particularly at London level, what are the priorities here that will enable us to get to net zero by 2030. It's 8 years away, less than 8 years away. It's to make a change in the fundamental way that the economy works in 8 years is incredible to me. I mean, you're talking wartime stuff, actually, to be serious. And when I hear the figures of £1 million in terms of giving advice, you realize that we are not even in the right orbit, if you like. And I guess what the frustration I've got is that at London level, you've got certain money that you can spend, particularly through TfL, where you can really make an impact on the economy. Otherwise, you're doing it by advice and guidance. And to do that, you need to be able to advise businesses what it is that they can do that will have the most effect. And so that what I lack here in the GLA presentation is any sense of what are the most effective leverage that we can make to get to net zero. Because I suspect a lot of people will do the easy things for obvious reasons, which will not necessarily be the most effective or the most challenging in terms of changing people's habits. So where's the strategy, I suppose, for London that says these are the things we absolutely have to fix? This is the money that is attached to it, not necessarily by the GLA, limited tax powers, but where is the money? So the total bill we can see in front of us as a community. I'd apply the same strictures to the Hackney one, because again, there's no talk of money, and there's no talk of timescale in either of these presentations. And if we're going to have a serious plan, especially in such focused time, we've got to be setting some real challenges, not necessarily for us to do everything, but to say to the community as a whole, and specifically to businesses, unless you do these things, unless the money comes in these sort of volumes, no way you're going to get to net zero. And I think just forcing people to address this issue of the urgency and the resource commitment is really lacking from these two presentations. So some great ideas, really like them, can't criticize any of the really helpful ideas. But underlying, there's no muscle, no urgency, no plan. And to me, that is an absolutely fatal challenge.
I would make the representation in defence of our officers from Hackney is that actually they've enumerated the COVID recovery numbers on one of the slides. What I was actually going to ask how much of that was definitely going to go to sustainability, but it adds up to over £1 million just in Hackney, which is obviously the same as the GLA is spending across 32 boroughs. I just put that as a matter of point of information, I think, in the conversation. Phil, do you want to come back, and then I'll take Councillor Smith a bit later, because I think there's a lot in that yourself and indeed Jasmine and Suzanne might want to come back on.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is I could have done an entirely different presentation about the overall strategy for net zero. I mean, I asked my team to put something together that was very focused on the specific questions around the very targeted piece of work we have with regard to SMEs, but I think there is a whole pile of work about the broader strategy. I mean, in answer to some of your really big quick picture questions, and the cost, we reckon, the net cost to get to net zero by 2030, and then to deal with sort of the residual emissions that at that point you'll be offsetting as you head towards 2050 is probably about 290 billion in London, discounted. And oddly enough, the cost of getting to net zero by 2030 versus getting to net zero by 2050 over the whole period isn't that different. The challenge is that the costs are much more front-loaded if you go for the more ambitious target, and that presents its own challenges. And the big areas you need to deal with on that are energy generation, retrofit and buildings emissions, and transport. And there is then waste. To some degree, there's issues around sort of green space. There's a big adaptation question, which has a whole bill of its own, but that's not necessarily about reducing emissions. It's dealing with the unavoidable impacts. And so then you have a strategy that sits alongside that thinks about how you can challenge that. Some of which, exactly as you have alluded to yourself, is about how the GLA deploys its own funds, both directly from within the GLA and through Transport for London. You probably saw earlier this week, the Mayor has announced a plan to issue a 500 million green bond, which we think we'll be able to deploy to support retrofit projects, to support electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and to support the rollout of district heating networks. But the challenge now is to move from move from sort of an ambition to a set of investable propositions, and we're working with London councils and the boroughs on that at the moment. Part of that is through the UK Cities Climate Investment Commission, which obviously the Mayor of Hackney is very closely involved with. But then alongside that, clearly, there's a big, TfL has its own challenges at the moment, but the rollout of active travel is important. The rollout of electric vehicle charging infrastructure is important. And of course, maintaining an effective public transport network is important, because that's a critical way in which you reduce vehicle usage. In terms of what's needed, I think we need to be retrofitting about 200,000 homes a year on average, and 15,000 commercial buildings. We think we need to reduce private vehicle mileage by about 27% by 2030. We think we need about 1.5 gigawatts of solar power on roofs by 2030. And that's going to be a combination of private finance, of GLA and borough funds. So in all honesty, those are going to be probably the smallest part, and central government finance. And a big part of the job here is also to make sure that we're making the case to government for how their funding needs to be deployed. I think it's really important to say that I've talked about the very targeted support programs aimed very specifically at small businesses, but a lot of that funding, the funding to support the rollout of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, that's critically important for small businesses if they want to decarbonise their vehicles. The support for green skills academies, that's going to be critically important for small businesses if they want to train themselves and recruit people with the right skills to actually deliver in this area. The financial support for retrofit is not specifically targeted at small businesses, but it will be available we will be looking to make that available for commercial premises as well as domestic premises. So all of that bigger picture plays into the question for small businesses as well. But you're absolutely right. The challenge is far bigger. The urgency is very much upon us. And you have to think about how you're working with small and medium-sized businesses and how they can play their part in the context of the wider picture.
Thanks very much, Phil. Suzanne and Jasmine, have you got things to contribute to that question from Councillor Sharman?
I guess I would just say, and Jasmine may want to come in with her work on the climate action plan as well. But I mean, I agree with the kind of urgency and the resource point. I mean, even if which is not going to happen, but even if we got extra millions of pounds, well, maybe it will happen, that'd be nice, to deliver this agenda within the next 6 months. There's still a matter of kind of resourcing it from within the council and us having a clear plan. So what I would say is I think the plan is very important. So both the climate action plan, economic development strategy, I see as being, from the council side, 2 key documents really to help us prioritise, because I think we must prioritise. We can't do everything. I think no organisation can do everything on its own. So we do need to prioritise. So I think that's really, both those pieces of work will really help us do that. And then I think the other thing, is really working with our partners, at the GLA, London councils, other London boroughs, because the scale of this is huge. The urgency is also, great. And I think we can always do more, and we've demonstrated that consistently, where we look outside of our boundaries and we join up, and we think about how we can achieve more by working in partnership. And we've just come out, well, hopefully we are coming out of the pandemic where everyone has been in emergency response mode, and now I feel like everyone is moving more towards being able to really focus on this agenda. It has been a difficult 2 years for small businesses, for councils, and supporting those small businesses, but there is a lot to do. But I think we are, hopefully by tonight, and also what we're doing behind the scenes, really demonstrating that now we are in the planning mode, and we really do want to kind of get moving on this as quickly as we possibly can. Yeah. Don't know if you've got anything else to add, Jasmine.
Probably only just to reiterate Phil's point that I think the role of SMEs has to be considered in the wider response to climate change, and I think recognising, for example, in these, I'll put the slide back up if I can. in these 7 climate action plans that the council is developing, there will be a role for small and medium enterprises in delivering each of those. So, for example, through the levers of procurement and sustainable procurement, and also, for example, considering the council's commercial portfolio, we can start supporting small and medium enterprises in Hackney to play a role in the council's wider ambitions of 2040. And I think that's exciting. So it might not just be through direct funding of those SMEs, but the wider role that they play. And then probably also just to reiterate Suzanne's point around coming out of the global pandemic and almost the behavioural science behind encouraging SMEs to respond. And while it is about making sure that they're going for those ambitious, urgent targets, it's also about encouraging them to make those quick wins as they're easy, and they do sort of all add up, all the pennies add up, as it were, and often can be a way of sort of unlocking the wider actions that a business can take once they sort of get past the inertia of making that first contribution. Those were the 2 points that I was just going to make.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take Councillor Smith and then Councillor Palace next. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, everyone. I mean, it's very exciting, all these new ideas and everything that are coming forward, and I think you're on the right track fundamentally. But I just want to make a few points and a few suggestions, just for the council in general, and just thinking about, successful delivery of the low carbon strategy, our low carbon strategy, within the corporate plan will depend on, integration with and implementation of other council strategies and action plans. So, active travel plans, air quality action plans, biodiversity action plans, so all these different plans need to be kind of synchronized and sort of integrated. So I'd like you to comment on that, because my feeling is that there are some directorates within the council just sort of working in a siloed sort of way. And I think we need to be kind of like, all directorates need to be talking to each other, which leads me to suggest the idea of having a director steering group, basically to sort of tackle the climate emergency within the sort of council's remit, which would extend to SMEs, etc. On the issue of the just transition, obviously, that's very important, and to ensure that workers of all ages are skilled for the tech and the industries of the future, particularly the green industries of the future. I have asked this commission before to give us a list of green jobs in Hackney, and it hasn't been forthcoming. I'd like to see a comprehensive list of the kind of jobs that are out there for real, and what they are, what these green jobs are that we keep talking about. And my other suggestion in regards to the just transition, if this can be noted, is to have a kind of a climate emergency skills action plan to ensure that the workers in Hackney of all ages are skilled for these jobs, these green jobs of the future, and just a list of what these green jobs are. I think it's really important to basically work out what we're talking about. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. I'm sure Jasmine will come back with some of the detail that she actually outlined in her presentation about those jobs. In a moment, Councillor Palace.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to put forward several things that it would be great if they could be noted. Maybe we could get written responses, because they're kind of just looking for information. So on the zero emission network, how is it funded? What and how many businesses are signed up to that in Hackney and in the other boroughs? And kind of what's the kind of governance structure in terms of the Greater London Fund that was mentioned, and London Investment Fund again? How many businesses in Hackney have looked to get funds through that? And if you could also, just as a written response, in terms of the emergency funds that you've mentioned, which are great, and it's very exciting you've been able to use that. Again, once we know what the exact uptake is, could the breakdown of that be sent, and exactly what it's being used for? So I just wanted to get that out of the way. And so my kind of 2 points is about, really for Hackney, is in terms of the money that we do have or can kind of draw upon. What is that in terms of what are in terms of Hackney? What is that? So one example would be SIL, for example, and I was just wondering how much of our SIL income which is not the neighbourhood infrastructure levy, which is obviously a neighbourhood SIL, which is going to be going into the Hackney Community Fund, but the other part of that SIL is going towards the kind of green economy. How much of that is being directed to to incentivize businesses? Are there any other funds stemming from Hackney that are available and could be drawn upon? And then the second point is around regulation, really, and what is possible through things like planning and licensing. So, for example, through licensing, are we able to stipulate, for example, that a business should be plastic free? Or what can we do in terms of that through licensing and giving out licenses? And in terms of planning, for example, what exactly are the levers that we can draw upon? Because I think one of the big issues is around transport, and I've kind of raised this with Councillor Coburn about, is there any way we could look into some sort of a scrappage scheme locally, even though we'd only be able to mostly partially fund it? But is there anything that can be done around that? Because I know that one of our kind of aims, I guess, through planning is we're trying to ensure that as much as possible these are kind of net zero developments, but a big issue is about getting access to funds. And the ULEZ, though much appreciated, you can still have a kind of upgraded diesel kind of a vehicle, as it were. But one of the big things that I know that freelancers face, and I was just speaking to one the other day, is around transport, and it's kind of struggling around that. So yes, a couple of things to be noted, and if I could just get a written response to those, because I know we don't have that much time, but I just wanted to get an idea in terms of grant and in terms of regulations, what are the exact levers we can pull upon to really impact what's happening locally. And thanks for all that you're doing already.
Thanks very much. I'm going to take a question from Councillor Ray so that both Phil and Suzanne and Jasmine can marshal their thoughts, because there's obviously a lot of things raised, issues to do with strategy and silos, as well as specifics of jobs by Councillor Smith. And as Councillor Pallas has sort of, I think, briefly summarised his points, which is one is what resources are available and what regulation and incentives and directives can the council use. Councillor Ray. Could you put your microphone on, please, Councillor Ray?
Thank you, Chair. I think my question is follows on from Councillor Pallas's and is directed towards Phil. Thank you. I suppose my question is, there are quite a lot of levers that GLA and local authorities can pull through regulation, and to what extent the GLA specifically is sort of thinking across the board on regulation. So, we've mentioned sort of miles driven in London that we need to bring down by, you said 27%. We've mentioned from the Hackney Council point of view around LTNs, and yet, over the last sort of 7-8 years, there's been a doubling of private hire vehicle licenses from some of which are all of which potentially are kind of small businesses, depending on how the sort of national operators sort of class their drivers. But so I just sort of, I'm not sure I see a totally logical approach from the sort of regulatory point of view versus the individual sort of very good work that you and the team do, and the sort of approach, rhetorical approach that the mayor is taking, backed up with some funding pots. But surely there seems to be a lot more that can be done across the board to use regulation as a nudge, sort of lever. So it'd be great if you could sort of expand on that a little bit, I think.
Great. I'm gonna go to Phil first, if that's all right, and then we'll go to Suzanne and Jasmine.
Sure. I mean, I think there are probably two elements of those questions that are quite linked, that are probably more for the GLA. One is the point that you made about sort of the overall regulatory framework and how that drives this forward. The other is about siloisation and how we make sure that the need to achieve net zero and the need to adapt to climate change is built in across our strategies rather than simply treated as an issue in isolation. And I think they are linked, because certainly, I wouldn't claim for a second that we have got everything right, but one of the things that we are trying to do very hard as an authority in the light of the Mayor's sort of commitment to net zero by 2030 is to embed that as a principle that runs across all of our strategies and all of our approaches. So, you look at the regulatory levers that we have. The net zero requirement is built very heavily into the London plan. That then drives sort of how what requirements we make when it comes to the deployment of our housing funds, for example, our affordable housing funds, for example, because those are being required obviously to support new developments that are consistent with the new London plan. The new London plan, it requires you not only to seek permission on the basis of homes that are going to be low carbon and net zero, but it also has requirements that require you to monitor. It's this kind of be seen requirement that requires the developer to then continue to monitor the performance of that building and continue to report on that. And there's a sort of portal we've put in place to do that. Obviously, you said the other really important regulatory lever we have as an authority is transport. And our climate commitments have driven an awful lot of the work that, while the ULEZ has a particular air quality benefit, there is a second benefit in terms of climate change emissions that comes through that. Obviously, our climate change targets are also at the heart of the Mayor's target within his transport strategy to achieve 80% of journeys being made by public transport or active modes of travel, so walking or cycling, etc. By 2030, and that feeds into the discussions we're having with government about the shape of the spending of the funding package that we're trying to put in place. There are a set of other areas where we don't have strong regulatory levers, but we do, exactly as you say, have the chance to nudge, to convene, to provide relatively smaller amounts of funding, or to use or to try and crowd in wider finance. And that, I think, is where you get into some of the most challenging stuff, which is around the retrofit of the existing building stock, rather than driving forward rather than placing new requirements on new developments. And there, that is where, on the one hand, we have done a lot of pilot work. We've funded some of the first deep retrofit projects in London. We're doing a lot of work on commercial retrofit. We've got a sort of accelerator program for companies that work in this area. We've got the green skills, but ultimately, it's going to be about generating investable propositions, particularly on social housing, and bringing in the private finance that enables you to roll that out at scale. That's going to be what makes a difference there. So we are trying to pull this all together. And then if you come to the final big pot of money, if not a regulatory lever we have, it's the adult education budget. Working with the Skills for London board, and green skills, coming back to Councillor Pallas's question, are at the heart of how we're trying to deploy that as we go forward. But green skills are really interesting. I mean, it's easy to think about green jobs as effectively being the sort of the construction end of the spectrum, the retrofit skills and so on, but actually they are much broader. And in fact, the largest chunk of green jobs in London at the moment by some distance is in the green finance sector. Finance, regulation, pardon me, the digital, these are going to be big green sectors as we go forward, alongside vehicle maintenance. How you maintain an electric vehicle is fundamentally different to how you maintain a petrol vehicle. And if we're moving to a world in which in which the sales of new petrol and diesel vehicles come to an end in 2030, then we're going to need a very, very big workforce that's ready to maintain and operate those electric vehicles. So we're trying to build that in across the piece. I am absolutely sure you are right that if you look for inconsistencies, you will find some. We're working across a whole range of areas, but I think the challenge is the right one to make.
Thanks very much, Phil. I'm going to get to hear from Suzanne and from Jasmine, then I'm going to call Councillor Stopps.
Thank you, Chair. Just to kind of cover what Phil's already covered slightly, but I guess in terms of the regulatory piece for the council, I mean, it's some of it is similar. You know, I think from the kind of planning and building control point of view, that is one of our kind of strongest regulatory levers, albeit, you know, it only applies when a landowner or a building or, you know, asset comes in to the planning system. So if a building's not going through the planning system, then, you know, building control may indeed apply, but the planning system may not. But when it does, you know, it's a fantastic lever. It's a fantastic regulatory power we can use, and it's, you know, long established principles of moving to net zero kind of embedded within the London plan and within, you know, Hackney's local plan, and other documents, other planning documents that we have. I think some of the other, and, you know, our role as a Transport and Highways Authority, again, you know, I mentioned some of those projects that we've been rolling out and that really are about making an impact on air quality, achieving, you know, moving towards net zero, reducing climate emissions. You know, there's a huge kind of role there that we as the council have. I think probably the other two areas that I would touch on in terms of regulation probably need, I think, a bit more exploration in this planning stage that I mentioned, that we are very, planning and development stage that we are very much at. And I think that's around kind of licensing, street trading, and kind of business rates. We're obviously, you know, a business rates collector, and I think there's something around potentially in those areas, both those areas, maybe not around kind of the regulatory powers, because you know, we will need to check the legislation, but there's certainly something around that interface with business and the influencing power that we can bring to bear, you know, when we work with businesses and when we collect business rates and when we are making decisions on the licensing or a street trading or a market pitch application. And that's, you know, that's all part of the work that you know, form part of our presentation really, is this, you know, what can we do, what powers can we use, and what levers have we got to pull really. I guess, Councillor Palace, you asked about a lot of funding points, which I think you said you were happy to have a written response to those, and we'd be happy to provide that, because I probably can't answer all of the detailed kind of funding queries that you asked this evening, and some of them don't sit within my particular service area, so I won't attempt to answer all of those. And then the green jobs point, I think, was the other question, and again, Jasmine, we may want to come in on this, but I think we've started off from this point of view as well. Green jobs just appeared as a term. What we would like to do and what we're doing at the minute is actually trying to identify what is a green job in the Hackney context. You know, when we say green job, what do we actually mean in the Hackney context? And that research, the WPI economics research that Jasmine talked about in the presentation, is what we've been using to identify what is classified as a kind of green industry, and thus, you know, what then is a green job. And I would, you know, agree with Phil. You know, green finance, green tech, it does seem to be a very strong area in Hackney. You know, and that's a lot to do with our kind of, you know, the land use and the types of land we have in Hackney. You know, we've not got swathes of industrial land, so it's going to be less on the kind of heavier type industrial green, you know, clean and green industries in that sense. And the green finance kind of and green tech is a kind of obvious one that we would expect to already be kind of quite a kind of an industry, or a kind of area of industry of focus, sorry, in Hackney. And I don't, just finish up there, and I don't know if Jasmine wants to add anything else on green jobs or anything else I've said.
Jasmine?
just briefly to come in, I think what's really exciting is that there's tools which are becoming available for boroughs to use to start analysing those green jobs at a local level, and they've only recently been made available. So, for example, the WPI economics report, which is a really great milestone, but also, for example, Data City, which uses Companies House SOC codes to analyse jobs at a local level. So those tools are enabling us to make sort of progress in that area of mapping out what those green jobs are in Hackney or what they could be. And there will be a combination, I think, of those higher level 4 and 5 jobs where it's really about encouraging those employers to work with our skills and employment team to make sure that, for example, employment plans are in place so that we're creating opportunities for local residents, for example, through Kickstart programs or other paid apprenticeship schemes. But then there will be level 2 and 3 and even 1 jobs which are more around skilled craft, and I think it's about probably finding a balance of those two in our priorities, and also a whole economy, for example, potentially around the circular economy, especially around our town centres. So I think there's a lot of interesting work, and the key thing will be that we work closely with skills and employment and adult education and moving forward.
Thanks very much. I noted that Councillor Pallis wants to do a follow-up. Councillor Pallis, you are very brief, because I do want to make sure that the rest of the Commission come in.
Sorry, yeah, just a very quick one. It was just about a general question about what finance is available from. So we've got SIL, I presume. There's TFL. Is there any other sources that the council is able to kind of to generate, as it were?
I think Suzanne said that she would do a written answer on the funds available.
Because that was my question. I asked them specific questions about numbers, but I was asking about the principle, about whether they could just say now what is available. Just to clarify.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in on that, Chair. Yeah.
Okay.
Fine. I mean, I probably can't give a full answer on all funding available, because, like I say, some doesn't sit within my service area. And the slides kind of later on in the presentation gives a bit of a rundown of how much we've kind of packaged up from the government COVID kind of emergency support programme to go towards this currently. The zero emissions network is the other obvious one that comes to mind, that actually doesn't sit within my service area, so that will need a kind of written response on how much is available there. But that's currently, in terms of area region, in terms of our kind of funding that we can give out to businesses around this, then that's currently what we have available. I'm very hopeful that more will be forthcoming. Probably no more COVID emergency funding, but part of the role of my service is really to try and identify opportunities to kind of keep initiatives like this going, and make sure we evaluate them properly so that we kind of try and run more initiatives. But I have to say that at the minute, in terms of the funding that Area Region is kind of providing for this initiative, it's this what you see on the screen here, and obviously we are funding kind of staff and resources towards this initiative.
Thank you. I'd like to add, actually, to that, Suzanne, if you are going to do an audit of the money that's available, can you do an audit on the sustainability / net zero criteria? I'm very aware that there is billions of quid swilling around in national government, which they will call apparently allocatable to sustainable efforts, but don't actually have very strong sustainability criteria. And if we are going to be spending any money at all when we're so constrained, we need to make sure that it's really doing what we want it to. So that would be helpful. If I know it's not straightforward, but it's just an important point to make. Can I go to Councillor Stopps and then Councillor Potter? Councillor Stopps. Can you put your microphone on, please, Councillor Stopps?
Sorry. Thanks for coming along, Phil. It's great to see the GLA come and talk to us. You mentioned two things that has prompted me. Housing funds, of which you have quite a lot, and the London plan, of which you've got a big influence. I want to talk about building homes, because you didn't talk about the embodied carbon in some of our homes that we're building. 8% of the world's carbon is tied up with the construction industry, concrete. If you could come up with a way of building carbon negative buildings, saving 8% of the world's carbon, using a renewables resource, providing warmer homes, less energy, using less energy, reducing transport of the materials, the concrete, and providing high quality homes and good clean jobs, you might think that was worth looking at. I have to say, from a net zero perspective, I am shocked that we are not talking about embodied carbon in buildings. Hackney, and I think you're a resident, is the global leader in tall timber buildings. So can I invite you to come along and have a look around some of our tall timber buildings? We have the first tall timber buildings, we have the largest, and we have the most of any local authority in the world. You suggested the GLA was interested in working with local authorities, but there is a logjam at City Hall, I have to say, and it is because of the tragedy of Grenfell and the misunderstanding of the tragedy of Grenfell that we are not building more tall timber homes. My understanding from a very good source is that this is about groupthink at the GLA. I'm using, hopefully this evening, to invite whoever is on the GLA that is involved in the groupthink that thinks timber buildings are problematic, to email me, and I will take them around the world's largest timber buildings and show them and introduce them to the architects who know how to build these buildings. I'll introduce them to insurance companies and fire protection companies that are prepared to put their name to timber as being a safe way of building. I don't know if you can comment, but please, if you're involved in that part of the discussions at City Hall, please go back and talk to your colleagues.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stopes. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. It's obvious from the presentation I'm talking about that Jasmine and Suzanne have given tonight that there's an awful lot of thought and movement in this line of work in terms of helping Hackney businesses to decarbonise. And I can see you're still on the journey of working out the resourcing and work with partners and the government, etc. So you presented in your next steps a kind of timeline. So there's 6 steps that's part of your planning. So I just wondered, have you got a kind of time frame for the steps? When are you planning to do the business survey? What, how long is this grant period going to last? The Hackney Climate Action Plan, it'd be good to refer to that a little bit in terms of the time with that, and also the preparation of the Hackney Economic Development Strategy. What are your aims or ambitions to getting to somewhere with each of these areas?
Thanks very much, Councillor Potter. I'll go to Jasmine and Suzanne first to answer those questions from Councillor Potter.
Yeah, that's fine. This is probably one for me. So I'll take each point in turn. Climate Action Plan, I'm not kind of the key person responsible for that within the council. I believe the intention is certainly that is kind of published later this year. Jasmine may help me out with a likely date, but I don't think I have one.
I believe it'll be this summer, so I think they're looking at Cabinet in June or July.
Thank you, Jasmine. So that's fine. Hopefully that answers that one. Further research into the existing green economy and green jobs in Hackney, that's underway at the moment. We've mentioned that WPI economics report, that's very helpful. And there is other work underway at the kind of London and central London level. I think it relates to the economic development strategy, because actually we may need to commission more specific Hackney intelligence and research into the kind of economic development strategy. In terms of economic development strategy, I'm hopeful that in the kind of, I guess it will probably be the financial year rather than the calendar year. So I would imagine it will be towards the end of this calendar year or early in 2023 that we will have an economic development strategy kind of coming to Cabinet for adoption, because we want to do it justice. You know, we don't want to rush it, and we want to take the time and actually ideally come and speak to this Commission well in advance of its adoption, and actually kind of work with the Commission on its development. So that's just a bit of a timeline for that one. Business survey again relates to the economic development strategy, probably kind of summer, autumn this year, for carrying out a business survey, and potentially earlier, but we've got quite a lot of things we need to consider in terms of what goes in that, because we want to make sure that businesses respond and we don't put them off by asking too many questions, but we want to ask the right questions. Engagement, support and communications with businesses is ongoing. You know, that's part of the work we do with the Hackney Business Network. It's part of the work we do with the grant funding initiatives that we're currently rolling out. So that's something that's kind of constant, and we do via our kind of networks, our website, our kind of social media, and the Hackney Business Network. And in terms of delivery of the grant funding to businesses, that's the grants that I just, they were on the previous slide. We're on a bit of a timeline to get all the grant funding to those businesses by 31st of March, so the end of next month, and then delivery will happen over the next calendar year. So all the projects that we are funding, the businesses need to deliver them by December of this calendar year, December 2022, and we will kind of work with the businesses to evaluate those projects as we go, and indeed once they're completed. I should mention as well, just as a point of interest, we are actually still giving out the final, separate to those grants, we're still in the process of giving out the kind of Omicron emergency grants for businesses. So that again is due to complete by March. So we're in the final kind of phase of kind of Omicron grant giving to businesses as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Suzanne. I would point out that this Hackney Economic Development Strategy we've been asking for at SEG since I got appointed or elected as chair almost this time last year. I know you don't want to rush it in case you get it, but you know, we do need to have an economic development strategy, particularly one that reflects our ambitions on inclusive growth and net zero. And I know it's not just your responsibility, but I'm just making sure that it's marked again on the record. We've been asking for this and haven't had an ability to have a conversation publicly about this strategy for now almost a year. Phil, have you got anything that you particularly like to respond to Councillor Stops on his observations?
I'm outside my sphere of responsibility and expertise here to some degree, because I don't run the Housing and Land Directorate, and as a result, I'm not responsible for building safety. So I would make two brief points. I don't know if there has been some GLA groupthink around this or not in the past. But I have certainly been sitting in a room in discussions where the issue of kind of multi-laminated timber frame buildings has come up, and people have very specifically made the point that there isn't a Grenfell related reason to prevent them being taken forward. So I think there is, if there has been some groupthink in the past, perhaps some of that is now starting to develop and move forward, or perhaps there are wider issues that I'm not aware of. So I'm somewhat outside my sphere of expertise. I think there's a bigger picture issue here, as you raise, about the handling of embodied carbon generally. And I mean, that is both applies to the material that you choose to build your new building from, but also quite big questions about whether in a lot of cases you should be building a new building in the first place, or whether there are better ways in which you can refurbish and renew the building stock that's already available. And this is certainly something we are interested in at the moment. In addition, the London plan is a little bit like the Forth Bridge. You only publish one, and because it's a 5-year process, broadly speaking, to get to the next one, you immediately have to start work on the next one. We are just beginning at the moment the sort of first stages of evidence gathering and baselining, which will inform the work that leads to the next London plan. Clearly, in that London plan, net zero is going to run through it like a stick of like through a stick of rock, and we are going to want to further ratchet and tighten what are already a set of provisions in the current plan that go well beyond what central government is setting. I think that is a process by which we should be starting to think really seriously about how we capture the question of embodied carbon in that process. That doesn't mean everything needs to wait until the next London plan is out, but that, coming back to your colleague's point, that is one of the strongest regulatory levers we have. So thinking about how we build that into that regulation will be vital.
Hang on, can you put your microphone on if you're going to come back?
Chair, can I be specific? And thank you for that. And please ask you to go back and find out. The Mayor of London will not fund cross-laminated timber and engineered timber buildings. That is the logjam.
Okay, Councillor Stocks, that is not actually, strictly speaking, within the purview of the... So you've made your point, it's on the record, and I think we're going to move on. Councillor Smith.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just on Councillor Pallas's point about funding, in a recent report from the National Audit Office in Achieving Net Zero, it mentions, and I know that you feel this as well, Chair, the government has not set out clearly the roles of public bodies outside central departments in achieving net zero, and that includes local authorities. I wanted to ask Phil and maybe Suzanne and Jasmine, have we been working with the Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy Department? I mean, have you been having talks with them, and also the Housing, Communities and Local Government?
Councillor Smith, this is specifically, I'm sorry to interrupt, I'm just going to be really specific about this. We must not have mission creep in these meetings. We have been talking about decarbonising Hackney's economy and various different aspects over a number of weeks and months. This is very specifically about decarbonising small and medium-sized businesses in the Hackney economy. If you have something that is specific to that in relation to what the National Audit Office report says, that's fine. But I do not want mission creep and sprawl in our questions. It's not fair to the people who come and give evidence to us.
The problem is, Chair, that local government representatives they spoke to have said there's a lack of clarity from central government on the role that local authorities should play basically in achieving net zero. Is that clarity forthcoming, I suppose, is the question. Are you getting clarity from government about how we're going to achieve net zero?
That is a broader question. I'm sorry, I just don't think it's fair. We've already had questions to our officers, which is way beyond the purview of what they've prepared for this evening. So I'm going to rule it out of order. I'm sorry, Councillor Smith. I'd like to actually sort of use my opportunity as chair to ask a question of everybody that's given evidence this evening, for which I'm extremely grateful, because it has been very useful and thought-provoking for us to understand what levers local government, both at capital level, at metropolitan level and at London Borough level, have to be able to achieve these things. But what I see is, as ever, chunks of money and ambition, but I'm not quite clear, bearing in mind how thinly spread this amount of money is, to the amount of people that you have to influence and you want to try to support, what success will look like. So I'd put the question to the people who are giving evidence this evening, bearing in mind the budget that you have available and the levers that you have available and the people you want to support, either to create the green jobs or to create green consumerism, or to decarbonise your standard business models of whoever is providing the goods and services locally. What does success look like, considering the resources you have at your disposal? Not like how you're going to get to 2030, because we know that's billions more money. How much of this that you actually got will actually contribute to that overall goal, rather than us just sort of saying we'll just kind of chuck it into the pot and hope for the best? I'd really like to get a grip on what success looks like as far as you guys are concerned, with the levers and resources available. Phil?
I think, coming back to the way you phrase that, I think there are two separate bits of success. One is, how do you get for want of a better word, what does success look in terms of helping, open quotes, ordinary businesses to decarbonise? And I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if we set out on the basis that success is the Mayor of London or Hackney Council giving a grant to every business in their area to replace their windows or insulate their premises, then we're not then we're setting ourselves up to fail. There are useful things that we can do some of that, but that in itself is a drop in the ocean unless we capture the learning from it and make that available in a way that is easy to navigate, that is useful to other businesses, and helps to encourage wider action. I think, to my mind, success in terms of what we can achieve is we saw that 69% of businesses are taking action. We saw that there's a much higher degree of sort of percentage who are aware of the need to take action, but pushing those numbers up through both our sort of advocacy and the use of our profile, but then having tools that those businesses can use that help them to take actions that are both commercially viable for them and that, going back to a previous point you made, that actually deliver a sustainability benefit.
But not to put too fine a point on it,
yeah.
Grants help the people who get the money.
Yeah.
Do they create or shape a market, reduce costs so that other people are able to do more of that?
In some cases they can.
Is that part of the strategy?
I would say for this, for this £1 million programme that I am talking about, no, not really. It's not shaping the market sufficiently. However, the much more significant amounts of money, if we're looking at, for example, how businesses can decarbonise through retrofit, the much more significant amounts of money that we're going to be able to deploy because we're getting grant funding from central government to do this, to support domestic retrofit through the Sustainable Warmth Programme, we hope will be big enough to stimulate that market. And the same skills, combined with the green skills money that we're putting in, the same skills that are used for domestic retrofit are going to be of value. The same companies are going to be of value when it comes to retrofitting commercial businesses and shops and other premises. So I think if you're looking at it in the broader sense, yes, that strategy is there. If you're looking at it in the sense of the kind of the very direct support we're providing for, which is labelled small business sort of decarbonisation, I think it's the development of an evidence base and the development of the promotion of a willingness to take action. And
can I push you then on the regulatory aspect of supporting local small and medium-sized businesses to be able to decarbonise? What does success look like when it comes to using those levers at London level?
At London level, coming back to where do we have regulatory powers? And the London plan is great, but I don't think very many small businesses are going out and building new buildings. But where they are, and it probably isn't zero, then we should be seeing those built to the highest environmental standards using our regulatory levers. We've talked about transport. Those levers should be driving already small businesses to think about the carbon emissions and the wider air quality emissions of their fleet when they come to invest in vehicles and when they come to think about how they get their employees capital. The one other regulatory lever that we have that we haven't talked about, and that'll be really important from Hackney's point of view as well, but is an area where small businesses can take action that will deliver a tangible carbon benefit, is waste. And moving more businesses to operate on a circular economy model is something that should be part of how we think about success, and is something that we can use our regulatory levers to drive forward. And we work with Re London, who used to be known as LWARB, for those who know, to make sure that advice and support is available to businesses so that they can understand how they can adapt as some of those levers tighten over time.
Thank you very much, Phil. Can I ask the same questions to you, Suzanne and Jasmine? What does success look like, bearing in mind the amount of resources and levers you've got to play with?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can answer it. I mean, I am hopeful that as this agenda rolls forward, that more resources, financial resources, will become available via central government, and Phil's talked about things like the green bond, etc., etc. I mean, when you take that into account, and I guess it's that hope value that more will be made available to support businesses in this. I mean, I do think it is coming back to, you know, basically an increase in our small and micro businesses who are taking action to decarbonise. So, you know, again, that back to that kind of Hackney Business Survey, you know, one of the questions, obvious questions, is kind of, what do you do at the moment to, you know, decarbonise your business, to, you know, be a more sustainable business? Survey them now, and I would hope that, you know, in however many years, you know, that is really increased, and that's what.
But to be clear, Suzanne, you think the solution on this is simply that there will be more council resources to support small businesses to decarbonise. We don't see a way of shaping a market so that the amount of support diminishes over time as they develop successful business models that don't require support.
No, I didn't say that actually. I was just going to kind of come on to that side of things. I guess I'm thinking about, you know, we know that some businesses at the minute, you know, they are not very engaged with this agenda. So I think we do need to recognise, you know, if we're thinking about a small or micro business in Hackney who is not engaged with this agenda, you know, we need to start from, if we're looking at that on an individual business basis, what are we seeking to do with that business around this agenda? But I think there is clearly something much bigger kind of forces at play around kind of changing how, you know, we, the council, operate with in terms of our levers, and how we do that on a much wider kind of macro scale across London, and indeed, you know, even wider, to try and shape kind of the economy, and how that operates. But, you know, when I'm thinking about a small business in Hackney and what they will be interested in, you know, hopefully they'll be interested in becoming more sustainable, but they will be interested in, you know, what works for my business? How does this help me kind of make a profit ultimately? Because we need to recognise the drivers of small and micro businesses, and indeed of all businesses. So that to me is kind of, you know, what success will look like on this agenda, and it is broad ranging.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Sharman has got a follow up, I think.
Can I just follow up? Because I thought your pursuit of this issue about what what success would look like under these programs elegantly expresses what I was trying to get to, which are targets in each of these. And I just wonder whether we have enough knowledge to create, if you like, a measure that would, for our investment return, that says for every £1 invested, we get X amount of carbon taken out of the economy. Because to achieve that, you then have some model, or in your own mind, of what in all these small businesses is the most effective way of doing things. Because at the moment, we are just judging by how much money we can get out the door, and the range of things. We don't have an output, if you like, from this. And I just wonder whether we have enough knowledge of carbon decarbonising to know what are the activities in a typical small business would give us the maximum decarboning per pound invested, and whether we could at least apply that in generic terms to the question that you're asking. What is a successful programme?
Thanks very much, Councillor Sharman. I'm going to ask for an answer on that before I come to Councillor Palace, which I think will be the last question for this evening, so that we can keep to time. I don't know, Suzanne, Jasmine, Phil, Councillor Sharman's point?
I mean, I mentioned earlier, Chair, I think it comes back to, you know, priorities actually, you know. So, and no, I guess others may be more well versed than me in what's the biggest kind of carbon saving a business can make. But, you know, I think I personally would need to understand that more. And again, that then comes back to what we focus on and what we prioritise in terms of our future work with businesses on this agenda.
Thank you, Phil.
I think it's very at a macro level we can do it. You know, and there's a lot of work being done in terms of map curves and so on about what's good value for money. But I think for this specific question, it's very difficult because it's such a diverse group of businesses, and actually that's where it comes back to the evidence base. What we are providing through the Mayor's Climate Challenge is money for people to actually go into businesses using what we know about what measures make what difference, to look at what carbon those individual businesses are generating, and where for them as individual businesses actions will make a difference, whether that's changing light bulbs, whether that's insulating, whether that's looking at their vehicle, how they travel, whether that's waste. I think in that way, coming back to the point I was making to Councillor Billington, we are trying to develop a better evidence base around what are the types of actions for different types of businesses that we should be prioritising. But right now, could I say, what should small businesses across the piece be doing? I don't think I can, because it's too diverse a group. I think we need to segment and we need to develop the evidence base, and that is the secondary benefit. And actually, I think in many cases, to some degree, the more important benefit that we get out of these programs to go and support individual businesses with grants.
Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Phil. Can I take it, Councillor Palace?
I'll be very
and
quick.
I've now got Councillor Ray. So again, we've got 3 minutes, 2 questions and 1 answer.
I'll be very quick. Suzanne, business rate relief. Can you tell us what you think might be possible? Could we reduce, rates related to kind of what people are doing? And a very quick one for Phil. Obviously, rents are a key issue and could be a key incentive. We've obviously got lots of high streets where we've got empty shops. Are the GLA, as part of their business kind of strategy for SMEs, considering acquiring these kind of premises and using that as a way to shape businesses' response to the climate emergency?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Palace. Councillor Race, and then we'll have an answer from Suzanne. Thanks, or indeed Jasmine. I'm sorry, either of you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to end on a positive note, actually. I think that the Zero Emissions Network that covers part of my ward in Hoxton and Shoreditch is an absolutely brilliant, I think, case study of what can be done with limited resources, but working with local businesses. I think there's over 1,000 sort of members, business members there, supported by the Mayor of London and the 3 councils that sort of converge in that area, Tower Hamlets, Islington and Hackney. And the work that I've seen happen there, I think, feels like it's really made a difference. There's a lot of businesses that are using cargo bikes, electric kind of sort of small, tiny electric vehicles to do lots of deliveries, and then sort of added into that sort of street scene improvements and the ultra low emissions sorts of streets that we've got there as well. So I suppose I'm going to turn this into a question and say that feels like it's a really good model to roll out in other neighbourhoods and in other sorts of areas. And so is there, it has been around now for quite a few years, the Zen. Are there plans to roll that out elsewhere?
And does it satisfy the criteria for evidence base in order to be able to scale it? Could I have a little bit from Phil on that, and then perhaps Suzanne and Jasmine to answer those questions?
On the zero emissions neighbourhoods, yes, we would like to roll them out more fully. And coming back to the question of funding, what we're not going to be able to do is provide the same level of sort of pump priming funding, because we want it to go out more broadly. But I think we have got the evidence base, and we are starting to see some of the savings and the benefits that are being generated, both commercially and environmentally, which will help us make the case for that. And the fact that it's seen as a success is really critical. And I think there's scope to start to link that into other initiatives that are in place, for example, around the use of the river for more light freight. You connect that into your cargo boat networks, and you start to see real change. On Councillor Palace's point, the GLA is not itself acquiring buildings on high streets. However, we are running something called the High Streets Challenge as part of the London's Economic Recovery Programme, which is providing grant funding to councils to look at how they can repurpose and rethink how their high streets operate, and including some of the retail buildings that aren't being used as they were previously as things transition, and you're coming back to avoiding silos. A big part of the thing that we are working with the pilot programs in through that program is how you develop sustainable high streets, as well as how you develop how you support commercially successful high streets.
Thank you very much. Suzanne, Jasmine?
I can comment on I think, first of all, the zero emissions network, which Phil just kind of mentioned. There's the kind of Hackney, Tower Hamlets, I think it's Linton, if I remember rightly, zero emissions network, where it started off kind of in Shoreditch, and it is now actually borough-wide. We might be talking about slightly different zero emissions networks, but the kind of Hackney-led one with our other kind of local authority, some other local authority partners, is now borough-wide, as I understand it. So it has been rolled out across the entire borough of Hackney. And in terms of business rates relief, I mean, that's something I can't really answer without talking, to my business rates colleagues. Is something that we're thinking about in relation to the work that we've been discussing this evening. And there is coming down the line a COVID additional business rate relief fund that we'll be rolling out, as will other councils be rolling out later on this year. And discussions around kind of green credentials will be part of those discussions I'll be having with the business rates team as we roll out that relief fund.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Jasmine, do you have anything to add?
No further comments, thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you so much, everybody who's given evidence this evening, and thank you, Commission, for asking such a wide range of very, very important and apposite questions when it comes to this issue. I'm pleased to say that we haven't excessively run over on that item, so we can make sure that we're just going to run through the rest of it. But again, I'd personally like to thank Philip from the GLA for coming to get that perspective from the Greater London Authority, and Suzanne and Jasmine for their detailed representations about what Hackney is doing. My observation is that we need to do a lot with not very much, and understand what the council's specific role is in actually what is a fast changing landscape of the economy, with a lot of different kinds of needs in small and medium-sized businesses, as well as changing opportunities for growth in some areas. And I'm looking forward to us being able to pull together some recommendations for the plan and others to be really specific about what the role should be for councils, and recognise where other players need to be shaping those markets, creating the regulation, but using our levers appropriately. Just to move on briefly on to the rest of the items for this evening, evidence givers, you're very welcome to go. I know late night evenings in town halls isn't necessarily everybody's favourite way of spending their time. We have the work programme, just to check that if anybody has any comments or questions on what we are currently planning up to the end of this council year. Is everybody happy with it as it's laid out? We have, I think, one more session, is that right? 9th of March. The 9th of March. Any questions or observations on that? No, that's great. Minutes of the previous meeting, are they a good and honest record? Councillor Ray, yeah?
Thank you, Chair. Although I wasn't here, I note that Councillor Williams was there, but isn't on the
Councillor Williams was there. I remember very specifically she was. So can we amend the record to reflect that? Because obviously that was quite a detailed meeting which she was witness to, and I think would have been useful for her work. Apart from that, we're agreed to those meetings are an honest record, yeah? And any other business, item 7? Excellent. So I declare this meeting over. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.